Members of Parliament and peers do sometimes have a lot of influence, they sometimes have very little. Depends who they are, depends how they are seen by their colleagues, it depends what their reputation is, depends what their background is. Have they served in government? Are they likely to know what they're talking about? So it's not possible to make a general statement about that. Some members of Parliament, some members of the House of Lords have enormous influence, relatively speaking. Others perhaps very little, and maybe they don't deserve too much. It depends entirely on their personal qualities, but also on the circumstances that have brought them to Parliament in the first place.
The bigger the majority the government has, the less influence the individual MP or small group of MPs have. Because if, as I remember happened very vividly when Mrs. Thatcher had her first government in 1979, one of her ministers wanted to introduce a proposal which was not very acceptable to a number of us. She had an overall majority of, I think it was 41. So I managed, together with a colleague, to get 22 signatures on a piece of paper from Conservative members of Parliament who would have voted against that particular measure. And when we confronted the minister responsible, I'm not mentioning names to save his blushes, because he's still very much alive and with us, but when we confronted him with this piece of paper and the signatures, he took one look at it. He realised the people who'd signed it were serious people, and that policy did not see the light of day. Now, fast forward to 1983, when Mrs. Thatcher had an overall majority of something like 140 in Parliament, and really she could do pretty well whatever she wanted, because although there were rebellions, and one or two quite significant ones, never was there any real threat to her parliamentary majority. You have to remember that at the bottom of all this, in our system, unlike the American one, there is not a physical separation of powers between the executive and the legislature. In America, in the United States, if you're a member of the president's cabinet, you are not a member of Congress, you are not a member of the House of Representatives or of the Senate. You might have been one in the past, but you cannot at the same time be a member of the government and a member of the Legislative Assembly. Here, you cannot be a member of the government unless you are a member of the Legislative Assembly. Every minister in government is drawn from the government side of the House in the Commons or the Lords, most in the Commons, but there are a fair number in the House of Lords. And when you have that situation, and you also have the situation where there are, of course, a lot of aspiring ministers, people who want to be ministers, who know that if they step out of line, they're less likely to be ministers than if they follow the party diktat, well then inevitably you have this built-in disciplinary force that makes it very difficult for any government to be defeated if it has anything like a reasonable majority in Parliament.